Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Not Again with Sandy. Today, let's dive right into the update on my Leary tee. I've been adding to the length, and you can see by my removable markers here, I have been putting a marker every time I have an increase row. So I have one more increase according to the pattern. I tried it on. It looks really good. So I'm happy about that. I will evaluate once I reach this 4th increase. I'll try it on again and see if I think it maybe needs one more. Remember, I'm a pear-shaped woman, so if I want this to be long at all, I would need to make sure it can pass over the widest part of my hip. And the best way to figure that out is just trying it on, I think. And what I imagine I'll do next is I'm actually just close to the end of my second round or second skein, which these skeins really go a long way. But I'm thinking that once I reach the end of this skein, so I don't have too many skeins attached, I will start on the sleeves then. I like to start on the sleeves and get them done before I finish the length of the body, because I'm always lengthening things, because I am a pear-shaped woman. And then I know that all the yarn I have left can be devoted to length if that's what I decide to do. So that's going along well, I think. I did think we should maybe talk a little bit about gauge swatches. I should have actually included this in the last episode's discussion. Whenever you're doing a gauge swatch, and remember, I am a very new convert to gauge swatches. They always tell you this many stitches for your stitch gauge and this many stitches for your row gauge. And I initially thought that I just needed to cast on that many stitches, knit that many rows, and then see if my swatch was 4x4. Well, that's really not the best way to do it. Most of the time I was knitting in stockinette, which is how many patterns are built. And by leaving it stockinette, anyone who's knit just stockinette knows it just rolls on the edges. The selvages just roll under, and it makes it very hard to measure without, getting out your boards and pinning them down and hoping that you're not distorting the fabric while you're pinning it down. So one of my podcasters showed me the way she does it is she starts off with several rows of garter, so just knit every row. And then when she has a good selvage, she starts the next row with the first and the last 5 stitches always being garter, knit every stitch, but the middle becomes stockinette. And what that does is give you a nice selvage. It kind of frames the stockinette part, and then it lays really nicely, and it's easy to measure. I don't even really take it off my needles when I'm measuring it. I just knit far enough along that I have a good space so I can clearly see my stitches and do the counting. And then when, if it's not correct, it doesn't match the proposed stitch gauge, which it almost never does, then I just do a row of garter to separate the existing swatch from the next section. And then I change my needles either up or down as the case may call for. And I just keep doing that until I reach a point where I have the right number of stitches in my stitch gauge. Now, the reason I should have talked about this last time was because when she said that 24 rows or rounds should be 3¼ inches, she was talking about row gauge, how many rows would fit into that 4-inch swatch. And I'm really bad at never paying attention to row gauge. This is partly because patterns mostly just tell you the length to knit to. They don't tell you the row count and then equate it to an inch measurement like the Leary tee did. And also because to me, it's hard to adjust. I mean, with the stitch gauge, you can adjust your needles, you can adjust your fiber, you can make adjustments that will be pretty reliable going forward with your tension being what it is. But with row gauge, I think the only way you can actually affect that is through loosening or tightening your tension. And I don't know about you, but at this point in my knitting career, my tension is pretty much set. It would be hard for me to have to keep in my mind, okay, keep this stitch loose, keep this stitch loose. And I don't like knitting with a tight tension. That's not comfortable for me. So because of the way patterns are written the way they are, I've been able to get along with really ignoring row gauge up until now. And I'm gonna, until I find a really good reason to start paying attention to it, I'll probably continue that. That's me, you do you. All right, so what we're gonna talk about now is my Comfort Fade Cardi. The Comfort Fade Cardi is a pattern by Andrea Mowry, and it's a fun pattern. I think it came out 5 or 6 years ago, and people were just crazy about it. Everybody was making a Comfort Fade Cardi, and I think you could find, oh gosh, you could find kits all over Etsy in every possible color combination for Comfort Fade Cardis. But I just loved the combination she used. I really enjoy the color turquoise or teal. I have both colors in my wardrobe quite a bit. And her sweater had kind of faded from a teal to a gray and then back again toward the end of the sleeves anyway. I think the bottom stayed gray. And I just thought it was perfect. That's exactly what I want. So I ordered the same yarn, same colorways from the same dyer that she had listed in her pattern. And here's where the mistakes started happening. And I should actually preface this by saying that I thought my large sweater was really the first sweater I had made after that pandemic summer. And it may have been, honestly, but I think I made this sweater before then. So this was full of all kinds of things that I just was not knowledgeable enough to prevent from happening. So let's talk about all those things. Yeah. I think the first thing I'm going to mention is that one of the medium colorways, so not pure gray, but not pure turquoise, had a lot of fun, like orange and yellow pops in it. But I didn't realize when I grabbed my yarn and looked at it that one of the skeins was missing some of those colors. I just basically took the first skein. I'm like, they're all going to be the same. But the skein I chose for most of that section of my Comfort Fade Cardi, one sleeve and then the body, that middle part of the body, did not have as many colors as it's supposed to. And so I'm going to show you pictures of one sleeve, that section, versus the other sleeve. You know, that's just me being full of blind faith that every skein is going to be as it's supposed to be and not looking very hard at it. And, you know, dyers are people too. Possibly when this one skein was being dyed, there was a distraction and the person never realized they hadn't put in those other pops of color. So it's not really vastly noticeable, but if you were hold them up together, you would see that there's a lot more color in one arm in that particular section than there is in the other arm. Oh, well, that happens. Another thing that I hadn't realized before, but this became kind of blindingly obvious. The pictures of Andrea Mowry in the colors ways that she chose look very rich, very saturated. You know, it's a deep kind of vivid turquoise. The colors when I actually got them were softer. There was not a vivid turquoise. It's still a fairly saturated color, but it's lighter. And this was my first understanding that it's hard sometimes when you're taking pictures and then putting them online to have those pictures match exactly the saturation and hue of the colors that you are showing. I understand this now better because in following some podcasts of people who dye yarn for a living, they often say, gosh, I had to take so many pictures and this is still not completely right, but it's close. And they like try and show a variety of pictures to show all the different ways this color can show up in each picture. So good to know. I think that they do the very best they can, but it's possible that if you order yarn online, you may find that it's not exactly the color you were expecting. Hopefully it's just a little darker or a little lighter than what you thought, just based on the light, I think has the biggest impact on it. But if you can roll with it, I could. I got the colors. I'm like, well, these weren't as intense as I thought they'd be, but I can roll with that. This is okay. It's still going to be really pretty. Okay. Let's talk briefly about the construction of the sweater. It's knit kind of inside out. I mean, you're knitting it in stockinette, but in the end, you turn it inside out, and it's the purl side, which would normally be considered the wrong side, that shows. And that's, I've had sweaters go both ways. I think that's fine. It's a fun design element. And then she used really wide, like 4-inch wide garter cuffs on each sleeve. There's like a 4 or 5-inch garter hem on the bottom. And then we picked up stitches from the beginning of the hem on the side, and then went all the way around the neck and picked up stitches for this collar. There's kind of a shawl collar that is there. This is a perfectly fine construction of this sweater, but some of the choices I made along the way mean it's not perfect. And I mean, you can see it's not perfect. Maybe if I hadn't pointed these things out to you, maybe your first glance is, well, that looks perfectly fine, but it's not. But before we talk about that, just quickly, I'd like to talk about the other thing to understand in this pattern is how the colors shift. This is a faded shift, which has been defined as going along in one color, then moving to the next color for just maybe one row, maybe two, back to the other color, and just slowly, by having different amounts of rows, you shift into the new color completely. But you do have this period of time where you're kind of working with each color briefly and then moving to the other color until you finally switch completely onto the other color. For some reason, when I was looking at the pattern and ordering the yarn, I was really surprised that there was only one skein of some of the skeins that were part of the fading. I thought, that can't be right. What I was thinking was that this was a marled kind of situation where I was always knitting with 2 strands of yarn and I just switched one of those strands out for a different color at appropriate points in time. Now, marling is a design technique. I actually have 2 books here with patterns that are marled. This is Marl Isle by Anna Maltz, and this is Better Together Marled Knits by Knit Picks. I haven't yet made anything from these, but I find the idea really intriguing, and so I hope to sometime when I have the right kind of yarn to try that out and see what that's like. So when I was ordering the yarn, I actually ordered 2 of everything. I think it was basically double the quantity of yarn because I thought, this has got to be a mistake. I don't even see how this could happen. Of course, a nationally published pattern, internationally published pattern, I'm sure, could be mistaken on that type of yarn. It wasn't until I actually really looked at the pattern and how it worked that I realized that it's just one strand of yarn at a time that just gets shifted back and forth with another colorway until it's able to change that to that colorway for good. Yeah, so I had a lot of yarn, but I saw that as a positive because now I could make this sweater really long. So let's talk about the first of my problems. Because the collar was all garter stitch, knitting every stitch, and I think this was my very first, well, I can't say very first, but it felt like one of the first times where I used German short rows. And I was clearly at one point, I got mixed up and I turned an extra time or two. If you look at the collar of my Comfort Fade Cardi, you can see that one collar is quite a bit beefier than the other side of the collar. I just skimped on that one. I had a lot more rows going back and forth on this side than that side. Yeah, it's not something people notice right away, if ever. I notice it, but I didn't decide to go back and change it. I think what could have happened is that I just had to set my knitting down at some point and picked it back up and just sort of forgot which side I was on. Now when I do short rows, I make sure I have a period of time where I can just get them all done at once. So I don't have to wonder what side was I on, and most of them now I've noticed, and maybe they always have, but are very clear about this is the right side you're working on. Okay, now you're working on the wrong side. Now we're flipping back to the right side, and it makes it easier to tell where you are. But when you're working in garter, every side looks the same. And I clearly just spent more time on one side during short rows than the other side. Yeah, that was pretty obvious. The other thing that I did when I lengthened it, whenever you're picking up stitches for a certain length of area, which in this case was a collar from hem around the neck to the other hem, the pattern will always tell you pick up this many stitches, and it will give you some idea of, pick up 3 out of the 4 as you're going up, and 1 for 1 as you're going around the collar, and then 3 out of 4 going back. I lengthened this quite a bit because I had all that yarn. And that stitch count would no longer be applicable to a longer garment. I don't know if you saw, but this garment really drags in the front. It's like that whole collar section, side band section was just way beefier than it needed to be. And I think the clear answer here is that I just cast on a lot more stitches, picked up a lot more stitches than I should have for that. I think the right thing to do would have been to figure out, I don't even know if I could have though, to figure out what proportion of stitches I was using. And if I'd used the 3 out of the 4, picking up 3 for every 4 stitches, that should have been fine. But I think I may have been just like, I can just pick up however many stitches I want. I'm not bound by this. And then it's really easy to pick up more than you need. And it's pretty clear the way it just kind of grew there on the bottom that must have been what I did. I still wear this sweater. I really like it. And it's cozy. It's, now that I'm bigger around than I was, it doesn't fit quite as well as it did, but cardigans don't have, especially if they don't have buttons or buttonholes, don't have to meet in the middle. So I do still enjoy it. It's very cozy. It would be fun sometime to make another one and just choose different colors and use some of my newfound knowledge to do a better job. Thanks for joining me.